Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are going to unpack an absolutely incredible scientific showdown. We're putting human children up against some of the most intelligent birds on the planet, New Caledonian crows. We'll be looking at a fascinating series of studies that basically put both species through the exact same cognitive obstacle course, just to see how their minds work when they're faced with physical puzzles.
So, are crows actually smarter than first graders? I know it sounds like the setup to a joke, right? But researchers really wanted to answer this by bringing a very ancient story straight into the modern laboratory. And what they discovered? Well, it fundamentally shifts how we think about animal intelligence, human development, and honestly, how our modern world actually rewires our own brains to solve problems.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. Myth becomes scientific reality. The water displacement hexathlon. The YouTube stumbling block. Kitty levels the playing field. Folk physics versus arbitrary rules. And rethinking human and animal minds. Let's get into it.
Section 1. Myth becomes scientific reality.
You've probably heard Aesop's fable about the crow and the pitcher, right? A thirsty bird finds a pitcher of water, but the water's just out of reach. So instead of giving up, the bird drops pebbles in, one by one, until the water rises high enough to take a drink. Well, scientists like Dr. Karina Logan and her colleagues decided to take this ancient fable of ingenuity and turn it into a real-world water displacement test. They wanted to know if this famous literary bird trick was actually rooted in scientific fact. And, to make it even more interesting, they tested it on both birds and human children.
Section 2. The Water Displacement Hexathlon.
Okay, so here's the tale of the tape for this experiment. In one corner, we had wild New Caledonian crows, including two highly trained standouts named 007 and Kitty. They were highly motivated by a food reward, specifically cubes of meat. In the other corner, we had human children, ranging from ages 4 to 10, who were playing to earn tokens they could trade in for their favorite stickers. The task itself was pretty simple: drop objects into tubes to displace a substance and bring a floating reward within reach.
Now, looking at the early rounds of this hexathlon, the results are just astounding. The crows and the 5 to 7-year-old kids performed virtually identically across 6 baseline experimental tasks. Both groups figured out, through a bit of trial and error, that they needed to drop objects into water, not sand. They realized sinking objects displace water, while floating ones don't do a thing. They correctly chose solid metal cubes over hollow ones, and they even figured out that dropping stones into a narrow tube raises the water level way faster than a wide tube. Basically, in these tests of physical causality, the crows were operating at the exact same cognitive level as a human first grader.
And those numbers really highlight just how dominant the crows were in these physical puzzles. Their success rates were off the charts. They were choosing the most functional, water-displacing solid objects an amazing 95% of the time. Sinking objects, 85% of the time. Choosing water over sand, 74% of the time. They proved, without a doubt, that they are incredibly adept at understanding the basic physical properties of the world around them.
Section 3. The YouTube stumbling block. Now, we get to the YouTube puzzle. And man, this is a brilliant mind-bender. The setup has a wide tube and a separate narrow tube that actually contains the reward. Here's the catch. The wide tube is too big for the reward, but the narrow tube is way too small to drop stones into. The secret is a hidden underground pipe connecting the two of them. So, you drop a stone into the wide outer tube, and, like magic, the water rises in the adjacent narrow tube. This complex setup completely tripped up the crows. It also totally baffled the 4 to 7-year-old kids. But human children ages 8 and up, they easily mastered this confusing sequence on their very first try.
So why did the older kids succeed where the brilliant crows completely failed? Researcher Lucy Chake hit the nail on the head. She noted that the older children were able to learn what to do to get the reward, even if the chain of events was completely counterintuitive. They essentially just ignored the fact that it shouldn't be happening. The crow, on the other hand, literally couldn't get past the fact that the physics didn't make visual sense. To a crow, dropping a stone in one puddle doesn't miraculously make a completely separate puddle rise. It completely violated their sense of reality.
Section 4. Kitty levels the playing field.
At this point, the researchers started wondering, maybe the YouTube test was just flawed in its design for birds. In the earlier tests where the crows succeeded, the tubes were spaced further apart. But in this original YouTube test, they were clustered really tightly together. So, Dr. Karina Logan actually modified the puzzle. She expanded the distance between the tubes to 30 centimeters, and she gave each connected apparatus really clear color cues, like a red mark for the functional tubes and blue for the non-functional ones. And this adjustment, it finally allowed a crow to crack the code.
And astoundingly, the crow that solved it wasn't some grizzled, experienced veteran of the wild. It was a juvenile crow named Kitty, who was just 6 months old. This is absolutely incredible. This young bird figured out the puzzle, dropping stones into the correctly colored wide tube to raise the food in the connected narrow tube. In doing so, little 6-month-old Kitty matched the cognitive performance of 7 to 10-year-old human children. Just amazing.
Section 5. Folk physics versus arbitrary rules.
So you're probably wondering, why did it take a modified, clearly colored test for a crow to finally pass, while 8-year-old kids just passed the original confusing test on their very first try? It all comes down to a concept called folk physics. This is an innate, strict understanding of how the physical world naturally operates based on direct visual cause and effect. Crows depend on understanding the natural mechanics of twigs, gravity, and water to survive, so they are strictly bound by the rules of folk physics. If an action visually contradicts natural cause and effect, like the magic of a hidden YouTube, their brains really struggle to process it. They just can't accept it because in nature, it's impossible.
But think about a modern human child for a second. An 8-year-old is completely conditioned to accept arbitrary rules and invisible mechanisms. You flip a plastic switch on a wall, and suddenly a glass bulb on the ceiling lights up. You swing a little plastic Wii controller in the air, and a digital bowling ball knocks down digital pins on a TV screen. You push a button, and Grandma's face instantly appears from thousands of miles away on a Skype call. Human children are basically trained from birth to ignore the fact that they can't see the causal mechanism. They readily accept that A causes B, even if it looks entirely like magic.
Section 6. Rethinking human and animal minds.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this explainer. The researchers really wanted to know how Kitty the Crow actually solved the modified puzzle. Did she deduce that there was a hidden pipe under the table, just like a human child might? Well, to test this, they removed the cover and actually exposed the hidden connecting pipe. And surprisingly, when the pipe was visible and the color cues were taken away, Kitty and the other crows failed all over again. They just started dropping stones randomly. This brilliantly illustrates that Kitty hadn't inferred a hidden physical mechanism at all. Instead, she had just used her massive intellect to learn an arbitrary associative rule. Red tube eventually means food.
So when we compare human children to crows, it's really not strictly about who is smarter. It's entirely about how our environments shape our problem-solving strategies. I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought. Does growing up with modern technology make us more accepting of the impossible? Or have we just completely forgotten the strict, unforgiving rules of nature that guide the brilliant minds of wild crows? It's definitely something to think about next time you flip a light switch. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the impossible.